Hi guys, welcome back to the Liberty Bunker. The recession caused by the coronavirus is really starting to become visible now. I think it was only about a week ago that we heard Mark Carney saying, this will be a shock, but it'll be a temporary one. It will pass quite quickly. Chancellor Rishi Sunak coming out, saying GDP growth would be just something like flat this year, maybe slightly negative, maybe a technical recession. It's going to be significantly worse than that. Realistically, we're probably looking at GDP growth of -5, maybe 10%. And that's before they print the money, because they'll manage to hide the real effects in the GDP numbers just by printing loads of money and dumping that into the system. But if you did it honestly, if you priced it before they dumped the inflation into the GDP figures, you're probably looking at something like -5, -10%, potentially more. But it will be hidden because they will hide it by using inflation to hide that. Now, this is a headline from The Sun. I'm just picking The Sun because there's two good headlines we can compare exactly what's happening here. So, Chancellor Rishi Sunak's colossal bailout of Britain's businesses is music to The Sun's ears. And let's take a further look down where it's highlighted here. Tories' people bailout worth £350 billion, and it won't stop there. It will continue. That £350 will get bigger and bigger and bigger as the extent of this recession gets deeper and deeper. That's almost a given at this point. So we've got this £350 billion people's bailout, which that's a lot of money. It's money the UK can't afford. This is essentially just going to be monetized. Some of it will go into bonds, but a lot of this will just be QE money printing. This is just fictitious money, which will ultimately lead to much bigger problems down the road. It's music to the ears of The Sun, apparently. But when we look at this headline just a few months ago, again, same newspaper, The Sun, Jeremy Corbyn's fantasy spending plans slammed as not credible by expert who says we'll all end up paying. Now, Jeremy Corbyn wanted some pretty wacky stuff. He was pretty out there, left-wing Marxist. It was pretty bad economically wise, but it was only 80 billion. So it's small fry compared to what Rishi Sunak is saying now, considering Jeremy Corbyn, left-wing Marxist, and we have supposedly, quote-unquote, right-wing conservative Rishi Sunak now stumping up with this 350 billion. If it was wrong, in my opinion, if it was wrong when Jeremy Corbyn was doing it at 80 billion, it's probably wrong when the Tories are doing it for 350 billion. Now, I get something needs to be done, and the people expect something that needs to be done, or the people expect something to be done. You can't really just sort of, in the way politics is these days, you can't just sort of say, grin and bear it, World War II style, just get on with your life kind of thing. People expect more, and sometimes unfortunately more is actually the wrong thing to do. I don't really mind that much, people supporting smaller industries, but when it comes to things like the airlines, I'm really against this airline one, because for a start, there's overcapacity in the airline industry. There has for a long time. This is one of the things, like if you have companies that fail quite early on into a recession, it's generally because there's something either structurally wrong with that company, or there's some kind of inherent problem in the industry they're in. Now, I get coronavirus is heavily impacted on people not wanting to fly around the world, but the fact these airlines are running so close to the wire is because there's inherent problems in the industry. There's overcapacity. We need some airlines to go bankrupt, or at least be restructured, because there's just overcapacity in the airline industry. It doesn't make sense to be bailing out companies which, just have inherent problems anyway. So there needs to be market clearing. If you have like a period of malinvestment, you need a period of market clearing. That's what we should be seeing at the moment. I mean, this all stemmed from 2008, right? We had all the moral hazard. We had this, too big to fail. At the time, it was the banks, and I expect, in another few months, we'll probably start seeing some financial industry starting to look towards government, the Bank of England, the Fed, whichever country you're watching this from, for financial support. That's almost a given. ECB for short, because the banks in Europe are in a real state. It's all kind of stemmed in 2008, the moral hazard. Businesses just thinking, well, what's the point in saving money for a rainy day, a what if environment? You might as well spend the money, in the airline industry. So many of these airlines, especially ones in America, which, when we talk about things like Virgin Airlines, it's majority owned by US Delta Airlines. So you can't just sort of think, oh, well, that's a British company, because often the parent companies, especially in UK airline industry, many of the parent companies are foreign owned. In America, it was very popular. It did happen in UK as well, but this idea of stock buyback. So rather than airlines saving money for a rainy day, if for whatever reason fewer people start flying around the world, they have a buffer, billions of dollars buffer, like some companies do. Airline industry didn't really bother with that. Like many companies, they were just doing stock buybacks to boost the price of their own stock price, because it looks good to the shareholders. It looks good to the board. It looks good for the CEO if the share price is going up. Rather than save money for a rainy day, they were just buying back their own stock because it kind of helps them and it helps with bonuses, etc. Now, kind of against bailouts as a general rule. I realise this is a bit of a black swan event, and there's realistically in 2020 you can't just say to the British public or the global public, you're going to have to suck it up, because most people again don't really have savings. That's something we need to really be going back to. People having savings of their own for a rainy day and not potentially relying on the government, because the government doesn't really have money either. It takes government from you, the taxpayer, me, the taxpayer, and even then they're running large deficits even before this crisis began. So this money will just be again through bond sales. It doesn't really exist, or through QE. This isn't the reserve of cash the government has. But if we are to support industry, I think I'd much rather see farmers, fishermen, local businesses, local industry, local manufacturing, things you can actually visibly, tangibly see if you give this person a tax break, or if you invest in this person, if you give them an interest-free loans to support their business. You see a visible thing. If you give a fisherman £200,000 and he buys a boat, that's a visible thing. When we bail out the airline industry, who are you really helping? You're helping the shareholders, you're helping the CEO, you're helping all the people that work on the board. Those really aren't people, in my opinion, that need helping. If you have £50,000 of stock in US Delta Airlines or KLM or whoever the hell it is, you're not really a vulnerable person, in my opinion. I get that pension funds own these things as well, and that's a problem, and that's a problem that happens in every recession. But the CEO, I'm not worried about the CEO of Virgin, getting by day to day. I think I'd much rather see a farmer, local fisherman, local manufacturing, creating local jobs through tax breaks, through investments, and maybe sometimes through just direct government subsidisation. Although that is a bit of a dangerous road to be going down. It's just an interesting one. I expect this to get a lot bigger before it gets a lot better. I know. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this one. I mean, it's pretty weird that how conservative government get elected, and the first thing they do is open up the spending taps. I get this is a bit of a black swan, but £350 billion makes Jeremy Corbyn's 80 billion look like small fry. And this isn't a problem that's going to go away anytime soon. This could be with us for 6 months, a year, 2 years. Potentially has the potential to bankrupt the UK. This really is. Everything's worse now than it was in 2008. We managed to scrape through 07, 08 by the skin of our teeth. All of those systemic problems haven't really gone away. The cheap money's just got bigger. We have the everything bubble now. We're not just living in a housing bubble. It's a housing bubble, stock market bubble, bond bubble, private bond, government bond. Everywhere you look, everything's in a bubble. It's pretty worrying if this thing fully collapses. It's pretty worrying times, but then there's not really much the average person, average Joe on the street can really do to protect themselves. Essentially welfare for the rich, right? So the government essentially want billions being transferred from taxpayers to support, the CEO, the stockholders at these various airlines, these other industries, which really need to be cleared anyway. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, well, what happens if the airlines go bankrupt? We won't get flights. All that happens is it just gets restructured. So if Virgin went bankrupt, those planes aren't going to be scrapped. Maybe one or two might be scrapped because there's overcapacity anyway. We have too many airlines, too many aeroplanes, and not enough people to sit in them. So maybe one or two will get scrapped. But the vast majority, all those assets will just be, sold on to other airlines, and the market clears itself. And if you're something like an aircraft mechanic, or you work in the aircraft industry, you're most likely going to find another job somewhere else because they need you. You're the guy that kind of keeps the aeroplanes flying. We don't really need just the shareholders of these businesses. They're not really contributing anything productive. I'm not against people owning stocks. I've owned stocks in the past. Don't really, pretty much flat at the moment, pretty much flat in cash. But I have nothing against people that invest in stocks. But if you invest in stocks, you take the risk, right? You're not really contributing that much to society. The guy that fixes the aircraft, he contributes a lot more than the shareholders do. That's just my opinion. That's my thoughts and opinions today. What do you think about these bailouts? It's going to get pretty sketchy. I don't see any end in sight to how big they could get. It's a lot of moral hazard. It's going to create bigger problems down the road. But the government haven't really got any better ideas than that. So, that's my thoughts and opinions today. Jason from Liberty Bunkers signing off, and I'll see you in the next video.